This is a video about race in America. This is a video about white privilege. And this is a video about a story that happened to me, a true story that happened to me in inner city Los Angeles that taught me a bit about white privilege. It's a video that I'm making because of what happened to George Floyd and because of the abysmal state of race relations right now, in hopes that this can just give people a different perspective to think about. This is going to be a real conversation about a difficult subject matter. I know not everyone's ready for this conversation, so if you're not ready for it, click over there. You got some other great YouTube videos about creative ways to cook tofu, or, whatever else is on YouTube these days. I don't know, but I want to talk about some real shit because I'm seeing what's happening in this country. Well, I mean, I'm Canadian, but it feels bigger than just the United States right now. I should say I'm seeing what's happening in the world, and I'm not going to be silent through this. So here's my story. In the summer of 2014, I had just finished traveling through Southeast Asia. Before that, I'd been living and working in South Korea as an English teacher. And after that, I went traveling for a couple months, backpacking, staying in hostels, the travel life. And I ended my travels in Hong Kong, and I needed to fly home to Canada. But the cheapest flight I could find was from Hong Kong to Los Angeles. And I decided, okay, why don't I go to Los Angeles and just extend my travels by a few more days? Because I've never seen LA. It'll be a cool experience to visit there, and then I can fly home. But I was really running out of cash, and I needed somewhere to stay. So I looked at this website. It's called Couchsurfing. And for those who don't know, Couchsurfing is an awesome way to save money as a traveler and have some very unique experiences, because it's a network of people who offer a free place to stay for travelers, no strings attached. And I found a couch to stay on with a guy named Shamari. Shout out to Shamari. This guy's a legend. He lives in Inglewood, in inner city Los Angeles. And Inglewood is next to Compton, which, these neighborhoods, guys, I'm a white guy from the prairies of Canada. I only know these words from, Tupac videos, from, the rap songs I listened to when I was a kid. But now I was going to Inglewood, and I was staying on the couch of this black man in Los Angeles. And I was going into a different world for me, a place I'd never experienced before. And Shamari, this guy, what a legend. He picked me up in his car. He brought me there. He went to work every day, but he explained to me, Dan, I went traveling myself in Europe, and people treated me really good, and now I want to repay that favor. So he was opening his house to travelers. Now, the area Shamari lived in, he explained it like this. He said, this is a working class neighborhood. People here work. So you don't need to worry about safety, it's pretty, he even said, Dan, there's one white guy who lives down the street down that way, so you'll be okay. Literally one white guy on the whole area. But that was where he lived. That was the reality of this area. And then this is how he described it. He said, okay, Dan, if you go down that way, that takes you towards Long Beach. If you go down that way, that's where you can get the bus that will take you all the way towards Hollywood and those parts of the city, the beach, everything else. But if you go that way, if you start walking 15 minutes that way, and then he looked at me very serious, he said, I can't help you. And he was pointing in the direction of Compton, and I understood the message. Just being a white guy from Canada, I can't just walk down any street I want in Compton on my own and expect things to be okay. That was the message I got from Shamari, and I heeded that message, and I did not walk that way. But I did decide to take that bus ride and I was taking the bus all the way towards Hollywood and, just doing some sightseeing. So the next morning, Shamari was off at work. I got on that bus, sat down, prepared for the bus ride, and it was a couple stops into the ride when I looked around, I realized, I'm the only white guy on this bus. Everyone else is black. The bus driver, everyone else on the bus. And this wasn't like a good realization or a bad realization. It was just a slight awareness of like, oh, okay, like I am the other in this situation. I'm really like, I'm just the other. And I'd been in this situation traveling before, in foreign countries. Sometimes you feel that. And, I got a couple of looks from people, just like not very subtle looks, just saying like, did this white guy get on the wrong bus? Like, what are you doing over here? Kind of looks. But like everything was cool. There was no bad vibe in the air until there was. Because a few stops later, there was a guy who got on who, first he had a big trash bag or a big plastic bag that appeared to have everything he owned. I don't know if this guy was homeless. I don't know if he had a mental issue or whatever. I don't know his story, but I do know that, he was loudly talking to no one in particular. Like he kept loudly talking to the whole bus, just kind of shouting things out. And I was just sitting there listening to my headphones, so I didn't know exactly what was going on at first, but after a few minutes, I heard him say some stuff about the white man. And suddenly I could feel my face kind of turning red. But I wasn't really paying attention. I just had a slight awareness of, oh, this guy's talking about racial stuff. And he's saying some things about the white man and how the white man is stealing from us. And the white man is a problem. I can't remember. I don't know if I turned my music down so I could listen or I turned it up so I could avoid it. But I was just kind of like aware that, I was the other in the situation that had just turned racial. But again, I was just looking out the window. I was trying to ignore what was happening. But then a couple stops later, I realized like this guy was talking to me. He was now like a few feet in front of me talking to me and just saying stuff about the white man and looking at me. And part of me wanted to take off my headphones and just be like what? What do you, I wanted to actually engage, but also part of me was frightened of where that would go. Because I felt very alone and very targeted in a sense. And I don't know, I don't know if I had tried to engage, if it would have led to a conversation, which even if it had been a conversation, I'm not going to win a conversation about, what am I going to defend the white man to a bus full of people in inner city Los Angeles? I'm not, frankly, I probably agree with most of the socioeconomic things that he's bringing up, but I was the target. I was the one who was receiving this message about the evils of the white man. So I just pretended it wasn't happening and just kind of stared straight ahead and waited for it to be over. And a few minutes later, it was over. He had kind of wandered to another part of the bus and was now shouting about something different by the looks of it. Again, this isn't no judgment. I think he might have had a mental problem. But I'll never forget that feeling of being there in that situation. And I'll never forget also what happened next, which is, I was sitting right in front of the back door. And as the bus was about to make its next stop, two young black guys who are about my age were getting off. And they looked at me, and one guy said, "Hey man, are you okay? I saw what was going down. Are you good?" And I just said, "Yeah man, I'm good." And he went like this. Before he got off, I gave a little fist bump, and then they went off. But I'll never forget that feeling. First, the feeling of being completely alone in that situation and feeling just targeted for something that felt out of my control. I mean, I could talk about how I'm not even American. I'm not even from Los Angeles. I don't know if any of that would have mattered. I don't know if that makes a difference. But I just felt like my identity had made me someone's enemy, someone who didn't really know me or had never had a conversation with me, and that was a really shitty situation to be in. But I also remember when those two guys spoke to me and let me know I wasn't alone, and kind of let me know that the bus had my back and that there were unknown people around me who were not going to let anything happen. And if that situation had deteriorated and that guy had tried to get violent or something, I wasn't worried anymore because I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. And I never had a chance to thank those guys for doing that, for standing up there and letting me know I wasn't alone, but I'll never forget that moment. And I hope one day to pay that back to someone in a similar situation where they are alone and they are getting mistreated because of who they are or the way they look. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying this story to say oh, look at me, I'm oppressed. Oh, some guy said some bad words to me on a bus. No, that's not the moral of the story whatsoever. I just think sometimes the universe gives you an experience so you can reflect on your own life and learn about the world around you and gain some empathy. And for a moment on a bus in inner city Los Angeles, I feel like I had an experience that taught me what it means to be a minority, what it means to be othered, what it means to be alone, what it means to be judged just by the way you look or the way you act. And I think just the fact that this is a crazy story for me just shows that I am white privileged. I am privileged that this doesn't happen to me often, because I can imagine for a lot of black people in America, this is just another day. This is going to a job interview and being the only one who looks or acts like you do. Going to a restaurant and feeling other people's eyes looking at you like, oh, what are you doing here? There's the overt racism. I think this guy with the plastic bag on his back, I think he was kind of being overtly racist and calling me out. But it's not always like that. Sometimes it's just the subtle ways people intentionally or unintentionally remind you that you're different. And when someone steps up and reminds you that you are the same as those two kids did before they got off the bus, that matters. That matters, and I just can't overstate how much that mattered in that situation. Anyway, the bus ride continued. Pretty soon, the guy with the plastic bag, he was gone. And as we continued the bus ride towards Hollywood, I saw the racial makeup of the bus change from me being the only white guy to suddenly it was a mix. There were more Latinos, there were white people, and then by the time we got all the way towards Hollywood, it was Valley girls taking selfies on their phones, and it was crazy how much this bus had changed just in this 45-minute bus ride, Yeah. But that gave me an insight into life in Los Angeles and the different lives that are happening in Los Angeles in different parts of the city. And that's my story today. I can never understand what it's like to be George Floyd or someone who feels at risk of being attacked or even murdered by police authority just because of the way you look or the person you are. So even though I'm sharing this story, I also, mostly I just want to listen. And if people have their own stories, I know I have a very international audience watching this. I have lots of fans, lots of viewers from Mexico, from Brazil, from the United States, from India, from all over. Have you ever been somewhere where you felt alone and you felt mistreated because of the way you look? If you have a story, please leave a comment if you're open to sharing, because I think these stories can make a difference. And I think that as a white person who very rarely experiences any kind of othering or any kind of just feeling of being alone, I guess, it's important to hear these stories and to try my best to understand these stories. Finally, just a quick word about the protests and everything that's happening right now, especially in the United States. I think that there's always going to be some edgy people on the internet who want to say, like, in response to Black Lives Matter, they want to say, well, all lives matter. Or they want to say, why are people protesting when we're dealing with a pandemic? Or they want to say, violence is never the answer. Or like all of these things to kind of subtly take away from the true mission of what's happening right now and the true goal of racial equality for everyone. And I just think that, it's not like people want to be in the streets during a pandemic. It's not like people enjoy putting themselves and their families at risk of getting a deadly disease, but in many ways, racism is the deadliest disease known to humankind. It's the oldest disease we know of. And if we have a chance to cure some of that disease, that is a much bigger story than the other virus we're faced with. So I stand with anyone who is marching right now and anyone who is still fighting to be free. I can't believe we are still fighting this fight in the year 2020, but we are. And it's not okay to be silent. It's not okay to look away. As difficult as this conversation is to have, it needs to be had. My country, Canada, we often look to the United States and sometimes feel like, oh, we have problems, but at least we're not as bad as them, But frankly, we have our own racial issues. I've read that a Black Canadian is something like 20 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white Canadian. The other major issue we have is about Indigenous Canadians who are continuing to be mistreated and in many ways forgotten by our society at large. Even though this conversation has been started by the incident in Minneapolis where a police officer murdered George Floyd while 3 other police officers stood by and watched. That's not where the conversation will end. The conversation needs to end with every one of us looking at our own society and working to make it a more equal place for everyone.